What is the God you believe in? Do you believe in a man in the sky God? Do you believe in
Well, there isn't anything more complex in the known universe than a human brain. But that's complicated.
Christ is the
It's
claim
very,
of
very
embodiment of the
complicated.
laws.
But I think it's true.
So you believe that Jesus was
God?
God?
Yeah. Christ takes the sins of the world onto himself.
Jordan Peterson was recently on the Jubilee podcast, and people were really confused on what he actually believes in. So we're going to circle back to the moment where he admits that Jesus is God, and we're going to see if we can find something to understand what exactly he believes in. So let's get right into it.
What God is it that you believe in? I've heard you talk about this sort of substrate idea and such, but in a simple way that I can understand, do you believe in a man in the sky God? Do you believe in it's a
Well,
force?
that's not as primitive a conceptualization as the atheists would have you believe.
What is it you believe?
Well, there isn't anything more complex in the known universe than a human brain.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want a model for reality as such, like proclaiming that it has something akin to the structure of the human psyche is not an absurd claim, given that that is the most complex thing by far that we know of. By far.
So what is it you believe?
Well, I've been explaining it.
But I mean,
I did say, I mentioned something which we skipped over very quickly because I introduced it too rapidly. The postmodernists figured out that we live in a story, but then they leapt to a
Question, real quick. The Diary of the CEO asked, what is the God that you believe in? And then he says the most complex thing in the universe is the brain, essentially. So is God the brain? Am I completely missing it? Let's continue.
faulty conclusion of two forms, well, three. There's no uniting story. That was one of their conclusions. In fact, the definition of postmodernism is skepticism of meta-narratives. There's no uniting story. It's like, well, that's a stupid theory because there's no union. So what? There's just diversity. Well, we worship diversity now in this utterly foolish manner. There's no difference between diversity and war. Without a uniting narrative, there's nothing but war. So, no, that's not going to work. Wrong. Hedonistic self-gratification. There's Michel Foucault for you to a T. It's like, why is that wrong? Why can't people just do what they want with whoever they want all the time? Because it defeats itself and quickly. It's not a sustainable game. If it's all about you and your whims, I don't want to be anywhere near you. And that won't be so good for you. That's not going to work. Power. That's really where the postmodernists landed with their, what would you say, temptation to turn towards Marx. It's all about power. It's like, first of all, that's probably a confession, if that's what you believe. And second, no, it's not. Try tyrannizing your wife and see how well that works for you. Try tyrannizing yourself and see how successful you are. Power's not the game. Okay, what's the game? What's the story? I mentioned earlier, it's voluntary self-sacrifice.
He asks, what is the God that you believe in? And then he goes on this tangent of all the things I would say that everyone believes in. The Marxist, the atheist, the hedonistic, like all the problems there, 100%. So everyone believes in a God. Yes. Or everyone worships something. Yes, that's one of the claims he made. But is he really just dancing? Let's see. Because he's even Diary of the CEO is like, so what is it that you believe in?
Right, you offer yourself up in the service of something higher. That's the basis of society. That's the basis of psychological stability. The Christian insistence is that that's the basis of the world.
I'm going to ask you again because I want to be clear. Is what is the God you believe in?
I think that the claim that Christ is the embodiment of the prophet and the laws, I think that's true.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
That's complicated.
Christ is the
It's
claim
very,
of the
very
embodiment of the
complicated.
laws.
But I think it's true.
so you believe that Jesus was
God?
God?
Wow. Okay, so he believes that Jesus is God. That doesn't essentially mean that he's a Christian, though. Just because you believe Jesus is God, the devil believes in God. in Jesus. Not saying Jordan Peterson is the devil. The point of sacrifice, which he always talks about, and Jesus was the ultimate sacrifice. But has he made Jesus his Lord and Savior? I think that's the thing that he's wrestling with.
I think if you understand what that means, that it's indisputable. I'll give you a brief explanation of why. Christ takes the sins of the world onto himself. So that means all the problems that there are his problems. Right. Okay, so the idea there is that there's no difference between making that assumption and then actually beginning to address those problems. And there's no difference between that which best addresses the problems of mankind and the divine. Those are the same thing. And I can't see how that can be otherwise, because the contrary hypothesis would be that you would adapt best to your life by avoiding things that are difficult and terrifying. And no one believes that. And so the pattern of the passion, this is the voluntary self-sacrifice issue taken to its extreme. The pattern of the passion is the decision to voluntarily confront and welcome anything that happens to you, no matter what it is. And that's a terrible thing to ask or endeavor to undertake, but well, the alternative is to shrink away. Well, the spirit of shrinking away is the divine. It's like, I don't think so. Like that's preposterous. The spirit of unlimited courage, well, that's not a bad start for a definition of what constitutes the divine.
Okay, so let me take a leap here and try to understand what he was saying. His conception of God is the most ultimate sacrifice. And Jesus was the greatest example of that ultimate sacrifice. And through that makes Jesus God by his definition.
The highest possible value.
Has your belief in God, religion, been shaken at all?
Oh, yes. Definitely.
Because you've been
constantly.
Over the last year and a half, 2 years, you've been through a particularly difficult time with losing people in your life that are sort of foundational to you. Tammy as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I was in extreme pain for 3 years. Right. I went through 3 years where every minute of my life was worse than any minute I'd ever had previous to that.
Wow.
It was terrible. And did I lose faith? Was it questioned, challenged? Absolutely. Absolutely. It just became absurd. It was absurd. So many things had gone off the rails. My wife was dying, my daughter was ill. Things had blown up around me in 50 different ways, and I was like seriously in pain. It was terrible. I was walking like 12 miles a day because I couldn't sit. I did that for months.
That's
Winter,
crazy.
rain, whenever. I had a friend who walked with me. It was terrible. And yeah, I mean, I thought, what was the desperation? It wasn't even the pain. It was the fact that I was in such terrible shape that I felt that I believed that I was a burden to everyone around me and that was only likely to get worse.
Wow.
And I thought, what's the sense in this? What's the possible significance of this? So yes, everyone's faith is challenged. I mean, Christ himself cries in despair out to God on the cross. And the story wouldn't be believable without that.
I would say to him, I think that's amazing that he had a friend walk with him 12 miles a day. And I would use that as a correlation to what Jesus does alongside of us. Jesus is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. Jesus promises to never leave us or forsake us, because Jesus doesn't promise that everything's going to be amazing or our life's going to be perfect. But Jesus will be with us through the pain and the suffering. And I think that's really a cool symbolic message there.
Like, if you're going to live, you're going to be pushed past your limit, right? If you're going to live. So, but who knows what you discover when you're pushed past your limit?
In that moment, you know, I've been in my relationship for some time now, and I genuinely think I'd rather die myself than my partner die. And you
Wow.
were there as Tammy was struggling with her health,
Yeah.
which is not something I've heard you actually talk about before, in what I've observed. She was dying. Is that harder to take for you than your own pain and struggle?
I think generally, if you love someone, it's worse to see them suffer than to suffer yourself. You certainly
Right.
figure that out when you have kids.
And this all happens at the same moment, the same couple of years of your life.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
Is there anything to, you know, people always search for silver linings and things. Is there anything?
We're both alive. My family's thriving. My adventure is expanding.
Life isn't fair, is it? Doesn't appear to be very fair. Because, I mean, this is how your story ended in that regard, but it could have...
I don't know if an adventure is fair. I don't even know if that's what we want. Like, this is something I really came to understand more deeply when writing this book. You know, what are we built for? We're built for maximal challenge. And that isn't the way we view ourselves in the modern world. We view ourselves as built for pleasure, you know, pornography. We view ourselves as built for consumption or for safety or for maybe for egotistical self-aggrandizement and fame. Those are, look, all of those things are better than their absence, let's say. You know, I think part of the reason that Andrew Tate is so popular among young men, because it's better to be a successful reprobate than a useless scrounger. Seriously. I mean, seriously. But that's why the villain in stories is often admirable compared to the coward, right? At least the villain is out there like doing villain things, you know?
Right.
But,
At least he has meaning.
well, and he's not
The villain, at least the villain.
He has a goal. He has a dream to pursue something within his life. And yeah, at the end of the day, it's probably going to be empty, but at least there's something that's moving him forward. And I would say the best thing is Jesus, having a relationship with Jesus, pursuing that and pursuing the calling that he has for you. That is so fulfilling.
Has meaning.
the villain's on a quest of sorts.
Yeah.
You know, a committed villain can learn. That's another thing too. What are we built for? I think we're built for maximal challenge. And that's way more interesting. I mean, one of the things that, I figured out that totalitarian states were a consequence of lies in about 1985. I really figured it out. I'd been reading Solzhenitsyn and Carl Jung. I was reading a lot. I was really obsessed by it. I thought, oh, I see. So hell is the dominion of the lie. Okay, so what do you do about that? Well, you stop lying. That's how you fight it. And that means you do that in your own life. You just stop, You practice stopping. You practice not doing the things you know you shouldn't do. You practice paying attention to your words to see if they're landing solidly and they make you confident instead of weak, right? You abandon your short-term desire for control and power, understanding that there isn't anything better that can happen to you than what happens if you tell the truth, right? No matter what it looks like to you in the moment. It's a strange thing, but I can't see how it could be otherwise because...
Remember in the Jubilee video, and he's like, I wouldn't tell a lie to save myself. I wouldn't even lie about a pencil. Because when you lie, you know deep down inside that you have to hide this thing to make sure that it will never come up. The truth will never come up. And that is a very daunting mindset to live by. It's creeping behind your shoulder constantly.
You have to hypothesize that you're going to align yourself with life, with nature, with society, with God, with yourself by lying. No one believes that. You might think you can get away with it. That's way different, right? But no one believes that. So then what happens in consequence of that? Well, I think what happens in consequence of that is what happened to Abraham. Your life just goes like this. Just opens and opens and opens and opens. And I don't think there's any limit to that. And that's ridiculously entertaining. Like unbearably entertaining. There's what you want in your life. You want it to be unbearably entertaining. And it's funny, when you watch people go to movies, I mean, James Bond, right? That's an unbearably entertaining life. And that's what people want to see when they go to a theater, because that's what they want. That's what they want. And maybe all the sorrow and catastrophe that's part of that has to be part of it, because otherwise there's nothing about it that's glorious.
Why does that move you so much?
Because life is very wide. There's the peaks and valleys are very distant from one another.
That is true. For me, I can't imagine just sitting around and watching TV, and like literally the only time I watch TV is when my wife is like a show or something, just to do it with her. Because other than that, I'm just constantly working towards something. And because of that, you can see more and more opportunities arrive, like God blessing something because you're working towards the calling that he has on your life. And it's amazing. You can see the doors slowly opening. And don't get me wrong, God opens doors and closes doors, and he allows things to happen and he doesn't allow things to happen. I've seen it in my life like crazy. There is adventure out there, but you got to trust God and continue to work hard every single day. And just know when you don't even feel like it, you got to push through.
And I don't know, maybe as you ascend uphill, your understanding of the chasm between the peaks and valleys also increases. Because you think maybe as you're successful, you're happier. Well, first of all, I'm not sure that success and happiness are the same thing.
True.
I'm not sure that we want them to be the same thing. I don't even know what people mean when they say they want to be happy. If you investigate it, technically, you find out that really what people mean when they say they want to be happy is that they don't want to suffer. That's different than the enthusiastic joy that you might think about, that's part and parcel of a child's laughter. You want to be happy. What, do you want to be laughing all the time? Is that what you're saying? Well, no, that's not what I mean. Well, what do you mean? Do you mean the gratification that comes along with the cookie at 1 a.m? No, that's not what I mean. Well, okay, what do you mean? Well, I don't know. It's like, yeah, you don't know. Partly what you mean is you don't want pointless suffering. Fair enough, fair enough. But that doesn't mean it's happiness that's your goal.
There's no...
I don't think that's your goal. I don't think your podcast would be successful if that was your goal. I think you would have washed up on the shoals of triviality long ago. I do. Yeah, well, there's something you're doing that's working. There's something about the way you're approaching the situation that's of broad appeal. There's some archetypal pattern that's you're acting out in your conduct in your podcast, because otherwise it wouldn't have the effect it has.
It's true. I agree. I don't know what it is, but because...
Well, some of it. We talked about some of it. You said that you can apprehend the outline of some of the principles. Some of that you probably discovered as you went along rather than, putting them.
Right. The greatest thing that I've learned is delaying the the gratification of the desires of your flesh or any desires. Because if you push through, if you do the things that you don't want to do, but you know you have to do them, but you do them anyway, because in the long term, it will pay off 100 times fold. And that is a lesson for all of us. That's a lesson even just spiritually. If we continue to follow God, even though it's not always easy, even though it's hard, in heaven you'll have all of the rewards. If you work out, you constantly delay the 15 seconds of gratification that you get when you eat that donut or eat that piece of cake. If you delay that, you will have the healthy body in the long term and feel amazing about yourself. Not saying that you can't have any of those things, but at one point you got to realize it's not worth the 5 seconds of gratification. Watching corn is not worth the 5 seconds of gratification and the entire week of regret.
Place to begin with, this seems to work.
Yeah.
So that's a discovery of a pathway.
Well, as a podcaster as well, I don't think you really truly understand your principles until they're tested. So, and especially when they're tested from both sides. So, this side's telling you to be more like this, and this side's screaming at you to be more like this. And you're faced with a decision. When when I started out as a podcaster, there was no one screaming, there was no one there.
Right.
But at some point in the journey, you get immense pressure.
Yeah. Well, then you're also...
that forces a decision out of you.
Yeah, well,
forces
you're
the
also
thought,
in a situation then when you have to start worrying about your reputation,
Yeah.
which is something you don't have to worry about when no one knows who you are.
Yeah.
And it's very dangerous to worry about your reputation. As soon as you start worrying about your reputation as a podcaster, you're going to fail because you're not interesting then. You'll stop taking risks.
Yeah.
So then, another question emerges. You got people yelling at you from this side and this side. Well, how do you know what's right? Well, it isn't. Partly it's by listening because you want to pay attention to your audience, but there's something guiding you if you do what you're doing properly that has nothing to do with the clamor.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because actually it links back to some of the principles we've talked about today. It's one of the things I've learned is having a good relationship, like good friendships and a good relationship with my wife is actually the foundation for me to be able to navigate people screaming at me from both sides.
Yeah, why?
Because it just anchors me in, it's like an anchor of like knowing who I actually am, irrespective of the crowd telling you who you are.
That is even more applicable to Christianity and Christians who follow God, because if they put all of their focus and their attention on Christ and don't worry about what everyone else says, and what everyone else says actually doesn't even matter because you're following Christ. There's something super beautiful about that, and it's grounding, and that's where your foundation is built upon, is on Jesus and Jesus alone. So it doesn't matter what other people say because your worth and your value comes from Christ being made in the image of God and your relationship with him. I think that's super valuable and super important. So guys, I would love to know what your thoughts are on this. Super interesting. I just want to thank you so much for watching. I encourage you all to have an amazing day and know that Jesus loves you. If you've never decided to follow Jesus, I encourage you to do that. In the description below, there will be a link for you to click to help you to decide to follow Jesus for the first time. Guys, I promise you it will be the best decision you could ever make. Now, always remember, Jesus loves you.